What is going on, YouTube? Broken Prophet here. And this is an episode of Hoodoo Unleashed that I'm actually surprised I've never done before. And for that, I apologize. I can't believe I haven't done it before. A lot of you know me already. But if you get this video shared to you, which I hope happens, and you don't know who I am, then like Jay-Z said, allow me to reintroduce myself, even though I'm introducing myself to you initially, right? Yeah. Um, a lot of people call me Papa Lou. I am a native of Georgia, live here right now, never left. I've been practicing hoodoo for over 30 years. It's a family practice. I mean, learned from my grandmama and my dad. And it's something that I've just been doing throughout my entire matriculation of life in one form or another. Okay. So I decided to do this video, where to begin in practicing hoodoo, because one, I realized I haven't done this video before, and two, I know it gets confusing, and you guys are very excited, and you finally learn that all this southern magic is real, and you like, well, I'm excited, I'm fired up. How do I get started? So that's what we're going to talk about today, guys. So bear with me. Those of you who already know me know I tend to ramble. I have an outline off camera, so I'm gonna try to stick to the outline. Okay. First and foremost, what is hoodoo? Hoodoo is an African American spiritual practice. Okay. Now, just keep that in your brain meats, because we're going to get to why that's important to remember. A Southern African American spiritual practice. And how did it become a Southern thing? Let me get into some history for you guys. We all know about the slave trade when the African ancestors were brought to, at the time, the New World, right? Right. Now, these African ancestors the majority came from one of three places, from the Benin Togo area, from Nigeria, Yoruba land, and from the Congo. From those three places, they brought three traditions, three religions with them. From the Congo came Palomayombe. From Yoruba land came the Orisha practices. Some of you may call it Santeria. Some of you may call it just Ifa. Some of you may call it Lukumi, the worship of the Orishas. And they brought Vodun, which now became voodoo, which also, when it hit New Orleans, became voodoo again in another form. Okay, so they came from one of three places. Now, how did hoodoo evolve? Now, you have to understand that the oppressors, the vast majority of them, were Catholic. And so the ancestors that landed in the Catholic controlled area, in Catholicism, you have saints. So, and a lot of us know this already, that, those who landed in Haiti, Haitian voodoo evolved because the African ancestors were able to take images of the saints and kind of hide the native spirits, the Loa in this instance, behind them. And so when the overseers would come in, they would see the African ancestors, slaves, looking at images of saints and go, oh my gosh, look at them. They're finally embracing it. They're finally getting it. When in reality, no, that was the resistance. Same thing happened in Cuba with Palo Mayombe, and also again in Cuba with Santeria, Regla de Ocha, Orisha practice. But hoodoo is different because in the American South, there was not a lot of Catholicism. It was mainly Protestant Christianity. And Protestant Christianity did not, Baptist, stuff like that, did not have saints. They considered it idol worship. But they did have the Bible. So those ancestors, since they didn't have like images of saints, with colors that match their native land spirit, they learned to kind of hide their work, conceal it, keep it underground, and tuck it into verses of scripture that they were able to memorize. And I know a lot of you are gonna be like, well, how were they able to memorize it when they couldn't read? We are some crafty people still, and we got it from somewhere. The quickest way to tell us we can't have something, no, the quickest way to get us to do something is to tell us we can't have it, right? And so they said we can't read, somebody learned. And with that, we would start using verses of scripture that kind of reminded us of like what that spirit stood for. So it was verses for love, verses for strength versus for work versus for divination, things like that. Okay. So that's kind of how hoodoo came to be. Now, you heard me use the word African ancestors a lot, and I told you to remember why that part is so important. Because when you begin in practicing hoodoo, you have to understand that the power of hoodoo flows through our connection to our ancestors for one of two, well, for two reasons. One, because they are a connection to the spiritual realm. Okay. Our power flows through them, not from them all the time, but through them. Part two, what does flow from them is knowledge. The African cosmology, no matter where it comes from, we are an ancestral veneratory tradition. We uplift, we communicate with, and we empower our ancestors because in communicating with, by giving them light and candles and offerings, we strengthen them. And if they're strong, they're able to further protect us and move things around here for us. Okay. Now, this is something that a lot of people are not going to want to hear. No matter who you are in practicing hoodoo, it goes through the African ancestors. It does. Okay. A lot of marketeers who are giving out confusing and conflicting information are not telling you that. So a lot of people who don't have African ancestry, especially like from the Southern folks, they're not getting the results. And that's why, you know. And that's another can of worms. We'll talk about that later. But I want you to understand that. Now, in beginning in hoodoo, you have got to construct an ancestor altar. Some people call it an ancestor table. It's the same thing. I think the people who call it an ancestor table are just kind of weirded out by an altar. All right. Even though, you're the one building it, you have to understand that that is now their space. That is the place where your grandma who passed on will be. And if she loved you in life, she still loves you. And that's where you can go and still communicate with her and lay your burdens down and talk to her and ask her for her help, like you would ask her for advice when she was still amongst the living. Okay. So that's number one. You've got to have an ancestor table. And I'll do videos on, how to properly construct one. And there's a bunch out there already, but that's the first tool you have got to have, an ancestor altar. You have got to establish that connection through your ancestors to the other side so that power can flow. Okay. Another thing that I want to tell you is that the Native Africans believed in a creator. So you cannot be an atheist and practice hoodoo. I'm sorry, you can't. I'm one of the few people that will actually say no, something is not possible. You can't do it. Now, the African ancestors called the creator a bunch of different names: Bondu, Aludamari, Nsambi. But it's, one creator. Our power flows from that one creator because that Native Africans believe that when the creator created everything, part of his energy is still down here. And we can use that for our gain. Our power also flows from the ancestors. And it also flows through roots and herbs. Some of that residual energy is in those roots and herbs and plants and things like that. And that is why we use them in our workings. Okay. Now, since we're talking about roots and herbs, we said you got to have an ancestor altar, right? When you begin in hoodoo and you're so like enthusiastic, you get tempted to buy up every root and herb and everything that's out there, right? And it boggles my mind why people do it, because a lot of you want to embrace it, some for your heritage, others because you are like having financial woes, but you want to spend all this money. No, the beginning roots and herbs should already be in your kitchen cabinet. It should already be there. We're talking about a tradition that evolved from, like ancestors who were slaved. A lot of times they weren't able, and that's what the marketeers will try to confuse you and say, well, they just went out and picked stuff. Well, if you on a plantation picking cotton, you can't just say, oh, excuse me, massa, I'm gonna go out there in the woods and pick some stuff. No, it didn't happen. So a lot of times it came from the very things that the slaves would cook with. And here's my cat Lulu making. Lulu, this is a serious video and you want to make an appearance. Go. Get down there. Sorry, y'all. I'm doing this in one take. I'm not editing it out. So you should learn how to work with what you already have. That is the very essence of our ancestors. We worked with what we had. Okay. Now, you should become familiar with what is growing around you. And I know a lot of you guys like books. Don't bother yourself with spell books, but invest in a book of was it botany, things like that that tell you what grows around you, its common name, its actually scientific name, so that you're not fooled by people trying to sell you the same thing under two different names. Okay. Now, while we're speaking about books, I'm gonna tell you about a very touchy subject for a lot of like my brothers and sisters who are awakening to our tradition. You cannot practice hoodoo without the Bible. You cannot. This actually should have been book number 1, but I was flowing in a different direction. You cannot practice hoodoo without the Bible. A lot of marketeers will tell you that you can. Why? Because they understand a lot of people have a knee-jerk reaction to the Bible, not necessarily because of Christianity, but because of Christians that they run into, hypocritical and stuff like that. You've got to understand, with this being an ancestral veneratory tradition, we uplift all ancestors, not just the African ones, but the African American ones that evolved. Okay. And when I just gave you the history, you'll have more respect for the book, even if you don't practice the religion, because we didn't learn it. People that my brothers and sisters always want to say, well, aren't I disrespecting the African ancestors by using a book that, they were forced into through slavery? You have to understand why they used it. They weaponized it. Listen, if the biggest way to beat your oppressor is to use a weapon that they themselves use. If an alien race dropped down here with ray guns and we bouncing bullets off of them, somebody is going to steal one of their guns because that's a weapon that they use. So our ancestors used this because that was a weapon that was being used by the oppressors. Okay. But also, you have to understand, this being a Southern culture, some of y'all have some Southern memoms and pawpaws, and they talk to sweet Jesus like he doggone is sitting over there in the chair. And our ancestors being a source of our power, you don't want to alienate a whole group of them by telling them that, the God that they prayed to was not their God. You uplift all of them, even if you don't agree with things. Because believe me, you're going to be asking them for things that they're not going to agree with. Some of y'all and y'all doggone love cases and stuff. Another thing, getting started in hoodoo, you're going to have to learn a method of divination. I know a lot of folks are like, well, doggone it, can I just sit there and talk to my ancestors and talk to spirits and they just download stuff into my brain? Sometimes they will. But until you get to that point of growth and evolution, you need to learn a method of divination. A lot of the ancestors would read regular playing cards. They would read bones. If they could get a hold of a deck of tarot cards, which is very rare, they would read that. But all are valid. You have to learn a method of divination, because our African ancestors would divine on literally everything. Who should get married, who we should go to war with, who we should make peace with, what we should do to get the rain going. I don't know if y'all saw the spit fly out. Until you understand what the roots and herbs do, then you can divine on it. Pull cards and go, should I use this to dress my candle with? Should I use that? All right. And the last thing that you're going to need when starting hoodoo is time and patience. Okay. I know that you want to get started right away, and you should get started right away. But guess what? This is a skill. It's something new. And for some reason, we always want to feel like when we, get started in something spiritual, it should start popping for us right away. Whereas if we want to get started in baking, Sorry, if I don't pet this doggone cat, she's gonna hop back up here, y'all. If we want to get started in baking, we'll accept like slow progress and failure. We want to get started being auto mechanics. We accept it taking some time to get good at it. Any other thing, I don't care, playing the guitar, picking a fiddle, anything. But when it comes to spirituality, we want to be able to move mountains right now just because we saw a video that had some spell work in it. All right. It takes time and patience. It's a skill. There's a connection that has to be made. You have to get good at it. Okay. And work with the things around you. Yeah, I know, you read about things like chicken feet and, Buckeye nuts, all the powders and oils and Florida water, Hoyt's cologne, Mojo bags, and all that. This is a marathon. It is not a sprint. You have to break it down into components. And it's all about taking, the step that's in front of you first. That's where a lot of people get frustrated because you're trying to do too many steps at once and you don't know who to believe in what and all this other stuff, and it gets confusing. Break it into components. Establish your ancestor altar and your connection with them. Become familiar with the Bible, because a lot of the workings that we use in Hoodoo, they're right there. You guys ask me about a bunch of different books, like, do I recommend this book? And I always tell you, go into the Bible. That's where it came from. When you start reading it, you will see actual spell work in the scripture. And that's how you practice traditional Hoodoo. And have patience. It'll be slow going for a while. Okay. But the end result is very, very worth it. And the last thing, and this is the last thing, keep it simple. If we know that it is a African American Southern tradition, allow that to like guide your thought process and your research. If it is an African American Southern tradition, well, if the person that you're trying to buy their book or look at, their video, if they don't match that criteria, well, that helps you to vet them. And also, you have to understand this is a tradition of slaves. So think about whether or not they had access to this particular ingredient you're curious about, or this particular working. You know, think about whether or not they had access to it. Like if someone tells you need a tiger's tooth to do some work, well, where a slave gonna get a freaking tiger's tooth? Keep it simple. Don't overcomplicate things. Break it down into small pieces. And, when you are good at one step, the next step on your journey will reveal itself. All right. All right. Hopefully this helps. I might, do a part 2, but I think this is enough to get you guys started. All right. Thanks so much, guys, for tuning in. Feel free to reach out. I do have a text line. And also, let me announce on this video that, I've got a stimulus thing going on. I wish I was able, because I love helping the community. I wish I was able to like just give out money. But what I've done is I have lowered the price of our road opening rituals that we perform on your behalf from $121 down to $75. And I've also cut the prices of my readings in half. Okay, for the 15 minutes and the 30 minutes. The hour-long readings are the same price, but at the end of the hour-long reading, because if somebody got to talk to you for an hour, man, it's just, that's too much. But what I will do is at the end of the hour-long readings, we have like an informal class about whatever came up in the reading. I'll give you like some remedies that you can do to overcome that. All right. All right, guys. Thanks so much. I tried to keep it short. Hopefully this helps. Y'all have a good one, and God bless.